The moment the Carter family stepped into first class, the entire cabin seemed to hold its breath, not in awe, but in disbelief. A well-dressed black man, a graceful woman by his side, and a bright-eyed child holding a toy plane. To most, they were just another successful family. But to one flight attendant, they were a mistake waiting to be corrected. She didn't greet them. She didn't offer them hot towels. She watched them, judged them, and moments later she made her move, demanding they leave their seats, questioning the validity of tickets they had rightfully purchased. It wasn't just an insult, it was a silent declaration. You don't belong here. What she didn't know was that the man she tried to humiliate owned the very airline she worked for, and what unfolded next would shake the aviation industry from 30,000 feet all the way to the boardroom floor. Before diving into the full story, comment where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the latest stories about justice, power, and the people who dare to challenge the system. Atlanta International Airport buzzed with its usual Monday madness. Rolling luggage, distant announcements, and the occasional sharp click of high heels against the polished floor. Among the sea of travelers strode Marcus Carter, immaculately dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, his presence radiating confidence. His wife, Vanessa, matched his poise in an ivory blazer, her elegance unspoken but unmistakable. Between them danced their 5-year-old son, Elijah, grinning with wonder as he waved a glowing toy airplane. They walked not with entitlement, but with quiet dignity. No entourage, no designer labels screaming for attention. Just a family headed toward Gate 42A, bound for JFK on Atlantic skies, Flight 473. They reached the priority line, passed security, and arrived at the jet bridge. The flight attendant at the door offered a routine nod. Nothing more. No warmth. No welcome. Inside the first-class cabin, the air was cooler, the leather richer, and the expectations sharper. Veronica Summers, the lead flight attendant, with over 15 years of flying experience, scanned the manifest. Her reputation preceded her, strict, polished, and intolerant of disorder. She prided herself on maintaining standards, but today her standards would betray her. As Marcus gently guided Elijah towards seats 2A, 2B, and 2C, Veronica stiffened. Her eyes followed every step, her smile freezing into a judgmental stillness. Her training manual didn't say it outright, but her instinct whispered it. They don't look like first-class passengers. She watched as Marcus lifted their carry-ons into the overhead compartment with practiced efficiency. Elijah marveled at the buttons beside his seat. Vanessa, with the care of a mother used to balancing grace and strength, placed his backpack underneath the seat ahead. Nothing was out of place, no disruption, no chaos, just a family settling in. Still, Veronica refused to approach. Minutes earlier, she had warmly greeted a group of 3 white business travelers with hot towels, offered newspapers, and made light conversation about the stock market. But now, she kept her distance, clutching her clipboard like a shield. The Carters didn't receive so much as a glance of recognition. And then came the first blow. "Excuse me," Veronica said, stepping forward with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I need to verify your tickets." Marcus, calmly fastening Elijah's seatbelt, didn't flinch. With the grace of a man who had encountered such moments far too often, he retrieved the printed tickets from his blazer and offered them without protest. "Of course," he said, his voice smooth. "We're seated at 2A, B, and C, as assigned." Veronica took them with both hands as if handling counterfeit bills. Her eyes scanned, then rescanned, the clearly marked information. Everything was in order. Booked 3 weeks prior. Fully paid. No flags. But that wasn't enough. "I'll need to confirm this with ground control," she said, already turning away. "Please remain seated." No apology. No gratitude for cooperation. Just a cold declaration. Then she disappeared into the galley. Vanessa turned to Marcus, her voice low but firm. "What does she think she's doing?" Marcus gave a soft, almost tired smile. "She thinks we're in the wrong place, but she'll find out soon enough." From row 3A, a white passenger in a pinstripe suit had been watching, his brow furrowed, but he said nothing. Just like most people do when injustice sneaks in quietly. visible only to those at targets. Back in the galley, Veronica dialed ground control. "This is Veronica Summers on Flight 473, she said tersely. "I have a party in first class. Carter, Marcus, I need to reconfirm their seats. 2A, 2B, and 2C. The agent on the other end was swift. "Carter Marcus, confirmed. Paid with Black American Express. Booked weeks ago. No issues." Veronica froze. "No issues?" she echoed. "Nope," came the reply. "Is there a problem?" "No," she lied and hung up. The truth sat heavy in her chest. She'd been wrong, but admitting it, especially in front of a man she had so swiftly judged, was unthinkable. Rather than return with a genuine apology, Veronica squared her shoulders, straightened her uniform, and prepared to double down. What came next was no longer a mistake. It was a choice. Veronica re-entered the cabin and stood before the Carters, her clipboard held like a warrant. "Mr. Carter," she said with chilling civility, "there may be an error in the system. To avoid confusion, I ask that your family temporarily relocate to economy until we verify things again." Vanessa's hand tightened around Elijah's. Marcus set his magazine down slowly. "You've already verified," he said evenly. "Are we still being asked to move?" Passengers nearby began to stir. A whisper from row 1C, "They're being kicked out." "Why?" someone else asked. Veronica clung to protocol like a life raft. "Just a temporary reassignment. Please cooperate." Marcus leaned forward, his voice firm but restrained. "What's this really about?" No answer, no reason, only silence. And the sound of something deeper breaking. Not glass, not metal, but the thin, fragile veil of assumed innocence. The quiet stillness in the first-class cabin was no longer just uncomfortable. It was loaded, pulsing with every unspoken judgment and the weight of watching eyes. Marcus Carter's calm composure had not cracked, but the edge in his tone now cut through the pressurized air. "You're asking my family to vacate seats we rightfully paid for," he said, voice low yet undeniably sharp. "After confirming our names, our payment, and our booking, you're still choosing to remove us?" Veronica shifted on her feet. Her clipboard, once a symbol of authority, now felt like a brittle shield. She could feel the stares, see them even without turning her head. Each gaze wasn't just watching, they were evaluating, recording, judging. "I'm just following procedure, sir," she insisted. "There's a discrepancy I'm trying to clear up." Marcus leaned back slightly, eyes narrowed. "There is no discrepancy, but there's certainly a bias, and now it's on display." Behind them, whispers thickened like fog. From row 1D, a woman murmured to her seatmate, "This is messed up. That kid said hello to me when they boarded. Why would they be targeted?" "They don't fit the mold," another replied grimly. In the galley, Veronica pressed a shaky hand to the stainless steel counter, her mind spinning faster than the aircraft's engines. She'd made a mistake, confirmed, verified, and undeniable. But still, she couldn't let go of the power she thought she held. Her ego warred with her professionalism. Her sense of order screamed at her to retreat and apologize. But another voice, colder, buried deeper, told her to push forward, to reassert control. Veronica chose the latter. She stepped out again, marching to row 2, clipboard pressed to her chest like armor. Her voice remained steady, but now hollow. "Mr. Carter, we must ask you again to move your family to economy class while we resolve the discrepancy." Marcus slowly stood. The silence in the cabin felt like a held breath. He adjusted his blazer and faced her fully. His tone did not rise, but the authority behind it now radiated unmistakably. "Miss Summers, I'd like you to listen carefully," he began. "We've done nothing to prompt this treatment. My son has said not a single disruptive word. My wife has followed every instruction, and I, as you know, provided verified documentation." He paused. Veronica opened her mouth but said nothing. "So let me ask plainly," Marcus continued, "is your request based on procedure or on perception?" The question lodged itself in the cabin like a thrown spear. Veronica's lips parted, but no words came out. "Because perception," he said, lowering his voice further, "can't be verified. It can only be confronted." The cabin held its breath. Passengers stopped pretending to ignore what was unfolding. And in that moment, measured, poised, and damning, Marcus reached into his pocket, retrieved his phone, and made a single call. He didn't leave the seat. He didn't raise his voice. He simply said, "It's time." Then he hung up. Veronica blinked. The words seemed innocuous, but the ripple they caused was anything but. Less than 4 minutes later, the cabin intercom softly pinged. A discreet chime followed. It was the internal priority signal, a code reserved only for top-level directives. In the cockpit, Captain Daniel Rivers furrowed his brow at the flashing prompt. He picked up the intercom line, and a voice met him with calm precision. "This is Robert Langston," the voice said, "CEO of Atlantic Skies." Daniel sat upright in his seat. His co-pilot glanced over, startled. "Yes, sir? Passenger Marcus D. Carter is on board, seat 2A. You are to halt all actions toward him. No further requests, no further movement. Is that understood?" "Yes, sir." "And Captain?" "Yes." "You're about to receive further instruction through encrypted internal channels. This incident is now elevated. Comply fully." Captain Rivers hung up, hands trembling slightly as the second message began to print on the secure cockpit feed. In first class, nothing seemed changed. Passengers still sat quietly. The Carters still occupied row 2. But power, real power, had shifted. And everyone felt it. Veronica had no idea the gears had already begun turning behind the scenes. In the airline's New York HQ, a group of executives stood around a live operations dashboard. Blinking alerts flooded the interface. Priority escalation activated. Founder alert, Marcus Carter. Internal legal notified. In a separate office, the head of legal read Marcus's initial complaint draft. It wasn't an angry email. It was a strategic, corporate-level escalation, citing specific service breaches, ethics violations, and referencing stockholder voting rights. "This is surgical," she whispered. Back on board, Vanessa reached over and gently placed her hand on Marcus's. "You started something," she said quietly. "No," Marcus replied. "She did. I'm just making sure it finishes." The PA system buzzed softly. Then Captain Rivers' voice came through. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a brief delay due to operational coordination. Thank you for your patience." He didn't mention turbulence. He didn't say air traffic control. Because this was no ordinary delay. This was the moment the airline tried to get ahead of what was coming. Veronica re-entered the galley and found Grace, her junior colleague, waiting. "What just happened?" Veronica asked. Grace held a small printout. "The man you forced out of first class, he's the primary shareholder." Veronica's breath caught. Grace didn't smirk. She didn't look smug. She only said one thing. "You didn't just judge the wrong man. You judged the man who writes the rules." Veronica's legs gave out beneath her for just a second, an imperceptible quiver that only Grace noticed. She steadied herself on the galley counter, her hand knocking a tray of folded napkins to the floor. The soft flutter of cotton hitting stainless steel was the only sound between them. "He's—" "What?" Veronica whispered, her voice now stripped of authority. "The primary shareholder," Grace repeated, this time with a stillness that spoke of both disappointment and disbelief. "Marcus D. Carter, founder of Carter Capital, strategic oversight board member. You didn't just insult a high-value passenger, you insulted the man who helped design this airline's ethics policy." Veronica's clipboard, so often clutched with pride, now felt radioactive in her grip. Her mind tried to reassemble the order of what had happened, but it was like trying to piece together glass after it had shattered. She had followed a script, one she had memorized over years. But this time, it wasn't a disruptive traveler or an overbooked seat. It was her assumptions that had malfunctioned. And the system she trusted to validate her instincts, it was now watching her. "Don't say anything else without legal," Grace added softly, picking up the scattered napkins. But Veronica couldn't stop thinking, couldn't stop remembering. That look in Marcus Carter's eyes when he said, "Perception can't be verified. It can only be confronted." That wasn't just a sentence. It was an indictment, and it had landed. In Atlantic Skies, New York headquarters, the emergency boardroom was in full lockdown. Every executive in the room was tethered to a screen, monitoring data feeds in real time, media pings, legal notifications, and, most critically, the Carter complaint filing that had been marked time-sensitive, requires board-level response. CEO Robert Langston stood at the head of the table, his knuckles pressed white against the polished mahogany. Who authorized the request for Carter to be moved from first class? He demanded. No one answered. Was it a system error? No, replied Martha Clean, head of legal. The logs show it was manual. Veronica Summers, flight lead. She initiated the inquiry, then escalated it without justification. So, no red flags on the booking system? None, Martha confirmed. 3 confirmed seats, paid by corporate card, loyalty program gold tier, not even a service note. Robert exhaled slowly. And she still requested they be moved? Yes. The room fell into thick, damning silence. Do we have any indication he's going public? The CFO asked. We don't know, Martha said, but he's already engaged legal. A formal notice was sent 20 minutes ago, asking for a full investigation, cabin footage, retraining of staff, and public acknowledgement. And if we refuse, someone asked. Martha didn't flinch. He triggers a shareholder vote, and given his holdings, he has the power to remove half this room. No one breathed. Robert paced slowly to the corner of the room, then stopped. I want a draft of the apology written tonight. I want that footage secured, and if that recording shows what we fear, then Veronica is not just suspended, she's the face of a systemic failure. Back in the air, Marcus sat with his son Elijah asleep in his lap. The boy's headphones still hummed softly, one side dangling as his head rested against his father's chest. Vanessa watched them both. Her hand brushed gently across Marcus's arm, not to reassure him, but to silently tell him she was with him in every step of what came next. The economic class cabin, now aware of the full story, had turned reverent, quiet. Passengers who once ignored the family now avoided even glancing too long, not out of disrespect, but out of shame. A few, like the woman in 18A who had earlier scowled at the child's toy airplane, now sat with her hands folded in her lap, unmoving, her eyes misty with realization. Marcus opened his phone. There it was, the email thread with the board. Every document attached, every timestamp cataloged, every line of dialogue now supported by witness statements gathered silently, without the need for confrontation. He hadn't raised his voice. He hadn't cursed. He had merely let the truth walk in front of him. Veronica re-entered the galley, her hands trembling as she tried to type into the internal crew management system. Each keystroke felt like a confession. She searched the database for Marcus Carter. There it was, not just his name, his designation. Primary shareholder, Tier 1, executive clearance. Do not reassign seat. Do not verify unless flagged by HQ. She hadn't just violated policy. She had violated the very structure she swore to protect. Suddenly, the words she'd used echoed back through her. Please move to economy until this is verified. The humiliation she inflicted wasn't just unnecessary. It was a direct affront to someone who had helped write the standards she claimed to follow. In that moment, Veronica understood something profound. The rules weren't flawed. She was. She had relied on instinct, but it wasn't instinct. It was prejudice dressed as protocol, and the entire system for years had let her think that was okay. But today, the system had turned on its own protector, not out of revenge, but out of revelation. On the ground, reporters were already preparing headlines. Flight 473 incident sparks, shareholder revolt, CEO Langston faces internal ethics firestorm, Marcus Carter's silent stand shakes airline industry. And within the walls of Carter Capital, an assistant handed Marcus the early feedback from the firm's internal audit. He read it without expression, then passed it back. We're not asking for heads, he said to his assistant. We're asking for reform. But if they refuse, he looked out the window, then we give them turbulence they won't forget. By the time Flight 473 began its descent, the turbulence outside the aircraft paled in comparison to the moral storm brewing within its cabin. Passengers who had once been passive bystanders now sat uncomfortably upright, processing everything they had seen. and everything they had failed to do. The silence was no longer empty. It was loaded with complicity. Row 3C, where the middle-aged white man in the charcoal blazer sat, was one of the first to shift. He leaned toward his seatmate, a woman in her 30s scrolling mindlessly through her phone, and murmured, "We saw it all, didn't we?" The woman paused, nodded, and then slowly put her phone down. In row 5A, the young woman with the laptop closed it gently, no longer pretending to work. She looked around the cabin, her eyes settling on the family now seated quietly in economy. Her breath caught for a moment as her gaze landed on Elijah, whose small fingers traced shapes on the window, his toy airplane clutched tight in one hand like a shield. She leaned over to the man next to her, a software engineer, judging by the lanyard still hanging around his neck. "We should do something," she whispered. "Like what?" "Say something. Write something. This can't just be a story we talk about in whispers after we land." And she did. With her fingers trembling slightly, she opened her Twitter app. "On Flight 473, I just witnessed a black family, quiet, respectful, and clearly qualified for their seats, get removed from first class by a flight attendant who never even pretended to have a real reason. What the world doesn't see is how bias dresses up like procedure." Arc Flight 473, Sharker's silent power. Within minutes, the tweet had crossed 10,000 likes. More passengers followed suit. "We all watched it. No one stood up when they were removed. We should have. Now I will." Carter family, Shakshashun unconscious, bias kill service. In row 2F, the silver-haired woman who had watched Elijah greet her so kindly when boarding whispered to herself, "We let it happen." Again. When the aircraft touched down at JFK, that collective awakening became irreversible. As the seatbelt sign dimmed, passengers hesitated, not to grab their bags, but to look, to witness, to remember. Some lingered intentionally near the Carter family as they exited, not to interfere, but to be present. They had missed the moment to act when it counted, but now they would not forget. One man in his 50s caught up to Marcus just as the family stepped into the terminal. "Sir," he said softly, offering a card, "I run PR for a tech firm. I don't know what you plan to do, but if you ever need someone to help tell this story right, I'll help." Marcus took the card without a word, just a nod. The Carter family walked toward the gate's security area, trailed not by cameras but by whispers, honest, urgent, ashamed. Conversations began bubbling up like water under pressure. She didn't even apologize. They were so calm. "Did you hear what she said?" She knew who he was by the end, and she still asked them to move. That last comment echoed as the crowd passed by a wall-mounted TV now showing the earliest news flashes. Major Atlantic Skies, shareholder removed from first class. Airline under fire for alleged discrimination. Inside the airport's VIP lounge, Vanessa Carter sat with Elijah curled up next to her. He had fallen asleep again, but not without questions. His last words before dozing off had cut through her like glass. "Why did that lady think we didn't belong?" She hadn't had an answer. Marcus joined her, having stepped away for a phone call. His face was composed, but his shoulders bore a different weight now. "Legal is moving forward," he said quietly. Vanessa nodded. "I've seen the tweets. People are watching. They know." "And that matters," Marcus said. "Not because it punishes them, but because it teaches the others watching how to act next time." Meanwhile, Veronica Summers sat alone in the crew meeting room on the ground floor. Her face was drained, but her eyes were no longer defiant. She stared at the internal flight operations monitor as if expecting it to change the past. Instead, it displayed something else. CEO-level incident report. Triggered. Investigation underway. Press advised. That was when she truly grasped it. This wasn't about her anymore. It was about a shift. A rupture in the invisible social contract that let people like her decide who belonged. Across the country, in a conference room in downtown Atlanta, the board of Carter Capital Group reviewed media clips, social media trends, and early legal drafts. The team's lead strategist tapped a screen. "Over 6 million impressions in the last 12 hours. The narrative is writing itself." Marcus walked in, and the room fell silent. He sat, looked at the headline displayed. Silent power, the shareholder who didn't need to shout, and finally spoke. They need to feel this, not in a courtroom, in their culture, in their assumptions, in their chain of command, because today it was my family, but tomorrow it'll be someone without a voice, and we're not letting that happen again. Back at JFK, as boarding began for the next flight, a passenger overheard two gate agents whispering, "That's the Carter family, right?" "Yeah, I hope they're treated right this time." A pause. "I heard he owns part of the airline." The other agent replied, "Then it's about time someone did." Marcus Carter never needed a press conference to prove his point. His power wasn't in a podium, it was in documentation. By the time the Carter family left JFK Airport, the machine behind the scenes had already begun collecting and organizing every shred of evidence necessary to launch what would become one of the most significant corporate reckonings in modern aviation history. Carter Capital's legal division worked like a forensic team. Every passenger tweet, every second of cabin footage, every radio transmission between the cockpit and ground control, even the timing logs from the galley phone, nothing was overlooked. Within 48 hours, a digital case file was compiled, encrypted, and backed up in 3 separate data centers. The file's title was stark and simple: Case 473, Systemic Failure, Evidence Bundle. Inside, the timeline began from the boarding gate camera footage, clearly showing the Carters passing through first-class boarding priority lanes without hesitation. It continued to footage from the aircraft's internal security cameras, silent but damning. Veronica Summers' facial expressions, her hesitation, her failure to greet them as she did others. Then the moment she demanded re-verification. Every pause, every doubt was recorded. One clip, just 28 seconds long, became the smoking gun. Veronica: "To avoid any confusion, I kindly ask your family to temporarily move to economy class." Marcus calmly: "Even after ground control confirmed our seats?" The silence after his question, the uncomfortable shift in Veronica's body, and the downturned glances of surrounding passengers all painted the truth louder than any accusation. This was not about protocol. This was about perception and bias. The legal team prepared what they called the 3-ring packet. 1. Visual evidence. 2. Testimonial evidence. And 3. Policy violation analysis. Meanwhile, over at Atlantic Sky's headquarters, CEO Robert Langston sat in his executive suite going through internal crew behavior assessments. The dashboard in front of him showed over 4,200 passenger complaints from the past 24 months. When sorted by subject, a chilling trend emerged. Seat verification disputes were disproportionately skewed toward passengers of color. He called in Martha Clean, the head of legal. "We're not just looking at one rogue employee," Robert said, rubbing his temples. "We've got a systemic pattern here." Martha nodded. "Which is why Marcus Carter's documentation is going to hit harder than any lawsuit. He's not suing for damages. He's demanding transformation, and he's coming with data." Outside Robert's office, the media pressure was mounting. Over 800 articles had been published in 48 hours. LinkedIn discussions flooded HR boards. Reddit threads titled, "If Marcus Carter was treated this way, what about the rest of us?" topped the front page. Still, Marcus remained silent. Until day 3. That morning, without warning or preamble, Carter Capital's official X account tweeted a single image. A blurred still of Veronica holding her clipboard, standing over the Carter's row, juxtaposed against the cabin footage timestamp. The caption read, "Facts over feelings, Shasha Flight 473, Joshua documented discrimination, Shasha Carter standard." It went viral in 20 minutes. By noon, Carter Capital's official website launched a microsite, www.carterstandard.org. The site presented the entire 473 timeline, divided into boarding, initial confrontation, ticket re-verification, forced seat relocation, cabin reactions, captain communication, internal record confirmations, ground call transcripts, full legal response. Each section came with official timestamps, CCTV footage, and legal annotations referencing both FAA regulations and internal Atlantic Skies training documents, many of which Marcus himself had helped draft years earlier. At the bottom of the page was a form labeled, "Submit Your Story." Have you ever experienced a similar incident with any airline? Add your voice to the data. Within hours, over 3,000 entries were submitted. Marcus wasn't just building a legal case, he was creating a movement. At the Carter residence that evening, Vanessa sat on the living room couch, scrolling through the submission entries. "Look at this one," she said, holding out her tablet. "A black veteran got pulled off a flight because they didn't believe his military ID was real." Marcus nodded without looking up from his laptop. He was compiling a list of reform measures that stretched far beyond Flight 473, training, auditing, anonymous reporting lines, whistleblower protections, and performance reviews linked to equity metrics. "Marcus," Vanessa said softly, "what you're doing, it's bigger than this airline." Marcus closed his laptop slowly and looked at her. "It has to be. If they only fix Atlantic Skies, then this all stays isolated. But if we prove this model works, evidence-driven, non-theatrical accountability, then other industries will have to follow." Back in her Queens apartment, Veronica Summers stared blankly at her laptop screen. She had seen the CarterStandard.org site. She had seen her own still image, her clipboard, her posture, her judgment, immortalized as a symbol of corporate failure. Her inbox was filling with messages from colleagues, some supportive, some critical, a few angry. One email came from the Atlantic Skies Ethics Department. "We require your written response to the findings outlined in the preliminary behavioral audit of Flight 473. Please provide a point-by-point explanation of your actions during all relevant timestamps." Veronica knew she had no defense, but for the first time she realized she didn't want one. She wanted to understand. Back at Carter Capital, Marcus finalized the internal document titled System Rebuild Proposal Phase 1. It outlined a comprehensive transformation of hiring practices, training standards, passenger service protocol, and crisis response, designed not for PR but for prevention. He emailed it to Robert Langston with a subject line that didn't carry a demand, just a deadline. Implementation required by Q3. Oversight begins immediately. The evidence was in. The story had been told. Now the rebuilding would begin. Day 4 dawned with a level of anticipation not felt across Atlantic Skies headquarters in decades. Executives entered through side doors. Legal counsel arrived early, coffee untouched, files in hand. Internally, it was labeled the Carter meeting. But for Marcus, it was never a meeting. It was a reckoning. And he made sure they all knew it the moment he stepped through the glass doors of the Atlantic Skies Executive Tower. He didn't bring an entourage. No legal team trailed behind him. No media crew. Just a single tablet in his hand and a quiet look that carried the weight of every passenger who had ever been dismissed, disrespected, or displaced for not fitting a stereotype. The boardroom was long, polished, and silent. At the head sat CEO Robert Langston. On either side were department heads, legal, HR, operations, customer experience, public affairs, and aviation compliance. A few glanced nervously as Marcus entered. No one stood, no one greeted. They simply watched, as if unsure whether to defend or surrender. Marcus pulled out the head chair at the opposite end of the table and sat down calmly, placing the tablet in front of him. He didn't look at anyone yet. Robert was the first to speak. "Mr. Carter, thank you for coming in person." Marcus glanced up briefly. "I didn't come for courtesy. I came for truth." Robert nodded tightly. "Understood. I've reviewed every report, every apology," Marcus continued, his voice cool and measured. "What I haven't seen is accountability. Real, name-bound, consequence-anchored accountability. So today, we're going to talk not about feelings, but about structure. Not about intent, but about harm." He tapped the tablet. The screen behind him lit up. Slide 1, Flight 473 timeline, internal culpability. "Let's begin with Veronica Summers," Marcus said, "the flight attendant who executed the removal order. Who trained her on bias prevention?" The HR director, a middle-aged man with a gray pinstripe suit, cleared his throat. "She attended the 2021 refresher program." "Voluntary or mandatory?" Technically, voluntary. Marcus clicked to slide 2. An email from 2021 appeared, addressed to all staff. Bias prevention session attendance is encouraged but not required. You called that training, Marcus said, turning to Robert. I call it optional ethics, and ethics should never be optional. Next slide. A heat map of passenger complaints by race and cabin class. Marcus leaned forward. You don't have a Veronica problem. You have a system that rewards people like Veronica. Fast promotions, minimal oversight, and zero meaningful audits of behavior unless someone dies or goes viral. There was silence in the room. One VP shifted in his seat. Then Marcus asked the question that no one had dared pose yet. Tell me, if I had been someone else, if I hadn't been a shareholder, if I didn't have the Carter name, what would have happened to my family? The public affairs officer, a younger woman with a sharp jawline and defensive eyes, murmured, Mr. Carter, that's a hypothetical. No, Marcus interrupted. That's the truth for thousands of your paying customers. People who don't own parts of the airline, who don't get meetings like this, who get removed from planes, silenced and erased because your system has taught your crew who belongs and who doesn't. Robert looked down. He couldn't deny it. And now, Marcus said, his voice hardening, I'm going to show you what change looks like. Not as a request, not as a PR fix, as a mandate. Slide 4 appeared. The Carter Compliance Framework. Below it, 5 pillars. Mandatory quarterly bias audits. AI-powered behavior monitoring on all flights. Passenger rights training for all flight crew. Unconscious bias retraining tied to performance bonuses. Live passenger feedback portal. Accessible in-flight. Implement all 5 within 6 months, Marcus said. Not selectively, not partially, and not just for show. The legal director raised a hand. These measures go beyond industry standards. It would place us under scrutiny for being overly reactive. Marcus stood. You should have been under scrutiny years ago. And if you're afraid of doing too much to protect your customers from bias, then you're not afraid of lawsuits. You're afraid of fairness. He turned to Robert. And Robert, this isn't about you losing your job. It's about you keeping your dignity. So you need to decide, do you lead the transformation or do you become the symbol of resistance to it? The words hit with the weight of a judge's gavel. Robert looked around at his executives. Each one read the room and realized the power dynamic had shifted. The youngest VP finally broke the silence. Mr. Carter, if we do this, we won't just change Atlantic skies. We'll set a new standard for every airline in this country. Marcus nodded. Then let that be your legacy. He closed the tablet. I don't need a thank you. I don't need my name on a building. I just need you to remember that the next Elijah Carter who boards a plane shouldn't need to inherit power to be treated with basic dignity. With that, Marcus turned and walked out. No handshake, no press cameras, just silent transformation trailing behind him like a wake in still water. Within 24 hours of Marcus Carter's uncompromising presentation, the ripple effects began to surge through the entire infrastructure of Atlantic skies and beyond. The boardroom might have looked calm, but beneath its polished mahogany veneer, the foundation of an outdated hierarchy was cracking open, one buried truth at a time. At 9 a.m., an internal memo titled Carter Compliance Directive, Phase 1 Implementation was distributed to all department heads. The memo, bearing Marcus's direct framework, was co-signed by CEO Robert Langston, an act that stunned even his closest allies. It wasn't just a symbolic gesture. It was a signal of surrender to a force more moral than political, more visionary than bureaucratic. But not everyone was ready to embrace it. In a back room of the legal division, 3 mid-level managers huddled around a table strewn with employee conduct files. This is absurd, one said. Bias audits? Live feedback during flights? This will bury us in liability. Only if we keep operating the way we always have, replied another, more seasoned, his tone more resigned. The era of plausible deniability is over. He's right. We've been hiding behind silence for too long. Meanwhile, in crew services, Veronica Summers' suspension had triggered an unexpected surge in email inquiries. Flight attendants from across the network began submitting confidential reflections on incidents they had either witnessed or participated in. Stories long buried were bubbling up. A black couple repeatedly asked to show boarding passes in first class, a Latina mother mistaken for a nanny, a Sikh passenger flagged 3 times on the same day. The truth was no longer anecdotal, it was structural. Atlantic Sky's internal ethics hotline, previously receiving fewer than 5 actionable reports per month, saw 84 in the first 72 hours following the Carter directive. Of those, 17 were flagged as severe, demanding immediate follow-up. One such report came from a junior pilot named Logan Choi. In a detailed account, he described how a senior captain once made a joke over the intercom about Diversity Day when a wheelchair-bound passenger of color was assisted aboard. It hadn't gone public then. But now, the time-stamped recording was already uploaded to the new compliance cloud. In the executive wing, Robert Langston sat in his office. The once prized skyline view of Manhattan, now a blur behind his sleepless eyes. Before him sat the Reform Committee, handpicked and empowered by Marcus. Robert tapped the table. Do you all understand what we're doing here? We are rewriting not just policy, but identity. And if we fail, it's not Carter we'll answer to. It's every passenger who sees themselves in his family. The room nodded in silence. Across the city, Marcus and Vanessa Carter reviewed the first phase reports from their home office. Vanessa read through the incident disclosures with growing discomfort. It's like turning on the lights in a room we didn't want to admit was dirty, she murmured. Marcus nodded, scrolling through a spreadsheet of anonymized employee testimonials. Exactly, he replied. But now that the lights are on, we clean it all. No more shadows. At JFK Terminal 4, a quiet protest had formed, not loud or disruptive, but visible. Airline staff from various departments stood wearing white ribbons, each marked with the slogan, "Dignity deserves altitude." None spoke. They didn't have to. Their silence, like Marcus's, was the loudest statement. Social media, too, had shifted. The hashtags were no longer just trending, they were evolving. Carter Standard had now branched into campaigns like Rush to Fly Fair, Osher Every Seat Counts, and Policy Not Polish. Passengers from other airlines began sharing stories under the banner, "I've seen this too." Atlantic Sky's competitors, initially smug at watching the PR blowback from afar, began to panic. Internal chats at United and Delta referenced Marcus's policy blueprint. Meetings were scheduled overnight. PR firms were called in. Bias audits were quietly discussed. The domino had tipped. But change doesn't come without resistance. At a high-level leadership meeting within Atlantic Skies, a veteran executive named Tom Delacroix challenged the pace of reform. We're reacting too fast, he argued. There's risk in overcorrecting. We don't want to alienate staff who feel unfairly targeted by this overhaul. Marcus, who had joined the meeting virtually, leaned in on screen. Tom, the only people who should feel threatened by fairness are those who benefited from the absence of it. Are you one of them? Tom froze. The room did too. It was the moment the old guard realized the Carter era wasn't about revenge. It was about clarity. Later that week, a national town hall was hosted online by Atlantic Skies, the first of its kind. Thousands of employees tuned in. A live Q&A session was opened. Marcus answered every question himself, calmly, transparently, without scripts. A gate agent asked, "How do we ensure this isn't just a PR stunt?" Marcus replied, "Because I'm not going anywhere. I don't need to tweet. I built this company with others like me, and we will hold it to the values it promised, starting now." In a private corner of the internet, a subreddit dedicated to airline employees lit up with a post from a retired flight attendant. "I served 32 years. I saw things that made me uncomfortable but stayed quiet. This week, I realized silence is how it all survives." Marcus Carter didn't scream. He didn't riot. He walked out of a plane and dismantled an empire with decency. That's the future of leadership. Back at Atlantic Skies, Robert Langston signed off on the final documentation authorizing Marcus Carter's oversight powers as part of a newly formed ethical flight committee. And for the first time in its 45-year history, the airline prepared to update its slogan, "Not just where you fly, how you're treated when you get there." 3 months had passed since the day Flight 473 landed, not just at JFK, but into the history books. And though planes still departed on time, cabins were still stocked with pretzels and pillows, and safety demonstrations still played before takeoff. Something deep inside Atlantic skies and across the aviation world had fundamentally changed. A new cultural training center had opened in Atlanta, where it all began. It wasn't sleek or high-tech. It didn't have the flashy marketing of other company initiatives. But every flight attendant, ground crew member, and executive team leader now passed through its doors under one simple rule etched above its entrance. Fairness isn't a feature, it's a foundation. Inside, trainees were placed in simulated real-world encounters, not only how to serve with precision, but how to recognize the blind spots of their own perception. They watched anonymized recordings of incidents like Veronica's, acted out and dissected. For the first time, the question wasn't, did this violate policy? But did this violate dignity? Veronica Summers was not fired, but she was also not reinstated. Instead, in a move that surprised even herself, she accepted an offer to join the Cultural Accountability Unit, not as a figurehead, but as a contributor to reform. She was the first subject of the system. Now she was part of rewriting it. "I don't want my mistake to be buried under PR campaigns," she said during a staff meeting. "I want it remembered so no one else repeats it." Her voice no longer held the sharpness of authority, but it held something rarer, humility earned through public consequence. In the meantime, Marcus Carter, once a silent force behind the scenes, had become an unexpected symbol for ethical leadership. He had turned down every TV interview, declined multiple magazine cover offers. When Forbes proposed a story titled "The Black Billionaire Who Changed the Skies," he requested a change to the headline, "The Father Who Took His Son Flying." And it was that image, not the billionaire, not the shareholder, but the father, that resonated. In school assemblies, Elijah's story was used as a case study, not to spotlight victimhood, but to open discussions on how bias is learned, inherited, and passed unless stopped. In one inner-city school in Baltimore, students were asked, "What would you have said if you saw Elijah being forced out of first class?" One 9-year-old girl replied, "I'd sit next to him, so he knows he belongs." Elsewhere, business schools began adding the Flight 473 case to their ethics curricula. Professors debated Marcus's decision not to escalate immediately, but to wait, to observe, and to act with surgical precision. Some called it executive restraint, others called it strategic justice, but all agreed it worked because it didn't rely on emotion alone. Meanwhile, within Atlantic skies, change was no longer confined to policy memos. It was becoming part of the culture. Cabin crews now held debriefings not just about turbulence or meal service, but about passenger interactions. A new position, Flight Equity Liaison, was created on every long-haul flight to monitor, report, and intervene when bias or differential treatment was suspected. Quarterly open forums allowed staff to anonymously share experiences, good or bad, and propose reforms. Employees were rewarded not for perfection, but for the courage to correct themselves. The company's internal newsletter began each edition with a new section, Lessons from Flight 473. One article, written by a maintenance technician named Jamal Alvarez, went viral on the employee network. He wrote, "I never thought my job on the tarmac had anything to do with race or class, but after reading Marcus Carter's report, I started noticing how we talk about important passengers. I used to think first class meant better people. Now I know it just means different seats. Respect isn't ranked by row number." And while some employees resisted, most didn't. They knew the old system had cracks. They had just never believed it could be fixed, until someone like Marcus dared to force the repair. At the airline's next annual shareholders meeting, Marcus Carter did not deliver a bombastic speech. He simply walked to the podium, held up a small toy airplane, Elijah's favorite, and said, "I don't want applause, I want altitude. Not for me, for all of us." He then stepped down without another word, and the entire hall stood, not clapping, but silent, reverent, and transformed. Across the industry, ripple effects turned into reform waves. Delta Airlines invited third-party watchdogs onto random flights. American Airlines began publishing quarterly passenger equity reports. United launched the Every Seat Counts campaign, where random passengers, regardless of ticket class, were invited to weigh in on service experience. Even international carriers took notice. Singapore Airlines reached out to Marcus for a private consulting session. Lufthansa updated its staff motto to efficiency with equity. But the most visible legacy remained not in policy, not in stock prices, not in brand reputation. It remained in every black family, brown traveler, elderly customer, immigrant passenger, and child of color who boarded a plane and realized they didn't need to prove they belonged. They already did, because a father chose to walk away from his first-class seat, not in defeat, but in strategy. Because a man who could have made noise chose to make history. And because a little boy named Elijah, who once asked, "Why is that lady mean to Dad?" now knew what his father always meant when he said, "We don't raise our voices, we raise the standard." The story of Flight 473 did not end in an airplane aisle or a corporate press conference. It echoed on tarmacs, in classrooms, behind check-in counters, and through the silent hallways of power. Because the legacy of what happened wasn't about a single man, a single family, or a single airline. It was about what a confrontation with quiet discrimination could awaken across an entire society. 3 months after the Carter family disembarked from the flight that changed everything, a new plaque was installed in the lobby of Atlantic Sky's New York headquarters. It was understated. Brushed aluminum, no corporate logos, no PR slogans. Just an inscription etched in clean font: "Respect is not a service, it's a right." In honor of every passenger who remained calm when they had every reason not to. Employees began stopping by the plaque on their way to meetings, not because they were told to, but because they needed to. It was a silent reminder that performance metrics, customer satisfaction scores, and even shareholder returns meant nothing if the system was built on assumptions rather than integrity. In the weeks that followed the incident, hundreds of letters arrived at Carter Capital's offices. Some were typed and formal, others handwritten, messy, raw. A retired flight attendant from Texas wrote, "I wish I had spoken up more. I've seen what Veronica did happen dozens of times. I just never thought the system could be changed. Thank you for proving me wrong." A father from Ohio wrote, "My son asked me why the man on the plane had to move. I couldn't answer him, but now, thanks to you, I can tell him about how one man turned disrespect into reform." And a middle school student from Chicago sent a drawing. It showed a stick-figure family holding hands in airplane seats, smiling. The caption said, "Elijah can sit wherever he wants now." But not every message was supportive. Some board members at Atlantic Skies quietly questioned if Marcus had gone too far. "He could have handled it internally," one muttered in a private call. "Did he really need to make us a headline?" Robert Langston, the CEO, answered bluntly, "He didn't make us a headline. We made ourselves one. He just refused to let it be buried." Veronica Summers, once the face of professionalism, became the symbol of necessary discomfort. She spent her days not on aircrafts, but in training rooms, listening more than speaking. Not because she was told to, but because for the first time in her career, she realized that growth doesn't begin with instruction. It begins with unlearning. One morning, after a particularly emotional session with new recruits, she stepped outside and saw a young woman waiting. The woman was holding a journal and looked uncertain. "You're Veronica, right?" she asked. Veronica nodded cautiously. "I'm a new attendant," the woman said. "I just wanted to thank you for not disappearing, for being here. It means something to see someone admit they got it wrong and still choose to help fix it." Veronica didn't say much, just smiled slightly and replied, "I'm not here to erase what I did. I'm here to make sure you never do it." Elsewhere, Elijah Carter turned 6. His birthday party wasn't extravagant, just a backyard gathering with paper airplanes, a cake shaped like a jet, and laughter that bounced across the lawn. At one point, he pulled on his father's jacket and asked, "Daddy, do planes always make people fight?" Marcus knelt to his son's height and replied, "Sometimes, but the right people can make them fly right again." As dusk settled, Vanessa placed a hand on her husband's shoulder. "You did it," she whispered. "You turned that plane into a platform." Marcus shook his head gently. We turned it into a mirror. The world had to see itself for what it was, so it could decide what it wanted to become. The world was deciding. 6 other airlines rolled out their own bias training programs. Legislation was introduced in 2 states requiring aviation customer service workers to receive anti-discrimination education. And universities across the country used Marcus Carter's case as a required business ethics reading. At the annual Aviation Ethics Forum, Marcus delivered a keynote. He didn't use slides. He didn't talk statistics. He simply stood before the crowd and said, "Policy can make people behave, but only empathy makes people change. We didn't need a rule book. We needed a mirror." On Flight 473, I wasn't just a passenger. I was a reflection. And what people saw forced the world to blink. He paused. "I don't want applause. I want accountability." And in that moment, no one clapped. They stood, silent, because they understood that sometimes the loudest revolutions begin in quiet dignity. Back at JFK, a mural now spans one of the long corridors leading to the premium boarding gates. It shows passengers of every race, age, and background seated side by side on a plane. There's no branding, no faces clearly recognizable. Just one caption: Flight 473, where respect took off. Passengers walk by it without always knowing the full story, but they feel it in the way the staff greets them, in the way issues are handled, in the way people like Elijah grow up never doubting if they belong. Because the greatest flight isn't one through the clouds, it's the one that lifts our expectations, steers our conscience, and lands us in a future where equality isn't aspirational. It's expected. That is the real legacy of Flight 473. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to catch more gripping stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.